moving along. Yosef's been in Eretz Israel for a little bit. Yosef Harmon. Okay. We got into the issue of, we said the idea of lavud. We said that if you have a space and a wall, and the space, let's say, is less than 3 tvachim from one part of the, is a space in the wall, we said that if less than 3 tvachim, we look at it like it's closed. So the Gemara said, we are on 18a2, towards the top. V'hani mili menasad. You got it? 18a2, at the top of the page. First words of the page. V'hani mili menasad. This thing that we said that if there's space less than 3 tvachim, the sukkah is still kosher. We don't say it splits up the sukkah, right? Because it doesn't say it splits the sukkah, and like you have 2 structures, and if you start with 3 walls, you only have 2 walls on each side. That's only next to the wall. However, of be'emsa, but we look at that, but be'emsa, but if the space is in the middle, the question is, do we say lavud that it closes the space in the middle? And let's say in the middle of the sach. One says that we do say lavud in the middle, and one says v'chad amar ein lavud be'emsa. One says that we don't say lavud in the middle. We look at if there's a space between the two between the wall and the space is in the middle of somewhere in the middle of the sukkah. We don't say, meaning if the space is by the side next to the wall, so then we say the rule of lavud next to the wall. But if it's in the middle somewhere, not adjacent to the wall, then we're going to look at, we're not going to look at it like it is closed, and rather it will split the structure in half. And the Gemara is going to bring different, where is the source for this machlokas? When it comes to the walls, we know there's no question, because we said earlier in the Gemara that if you have reeds that are standing, and let's say like you have poles that are standing, remember we gave that example, within, here's a pole, and there's a space less than 9 to 12 inches, we look at it that it's combined, that it's together. But that's a law by walls. The question is, what about if it's in the middle of the sukkah? How would we look at it? And so one opinion holds that that you would not apply the law of lavud if it's something which is in the middle of the sukkah, middle of the schach. Let's see what the commentary says over here. Okay, so let's continue in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Kod the Tanya, we learned in a brisa. The Gemara says, my timer demand the Amma yesh lova be'emsa. What's the source that says that there is a rule of lavud applies also in the middle, not just in a wall, or not something that's just adjacent to the wall. If you look at the art scroll note number 14, where they say that there's a halacha in Moshe Missinai that we say that a wall, that if there's a space in a wall, that we look at it as it's closed as long as the space is less than 3 tvachim. So he holds that this only applies if it's a gap in a wall or next to the wall. So according to this, if the gap is within a schach that's not directly close to the wall, if it's not directly next to the wall, there won't be this rule of lava. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. Now, what's the source for this machlokas? The Tanya. We learned in a brayso. If you want to send to the group that we're on, the Tanya, we learned in a brayso. Kora hayotze mikoso zeh ve'einu nogas b'koso la'achar. If you have a beam, let's say you have this alleyway, that you have a courtyard, and then it has an alleyway, and let the alleyway, let's say, is closed on 3 sides. But one side opens to public property. So, good morning. So what's the issue? The side that's open to public property, we want people to know that you're entering into private property, and want the people on the inside, on the private property, to be careful to know that they shouldn't carry out into public property. So how do people know that this is public, this is private? So if we put up a beam, a kora, or some sort of beam that goes across, and so then everybody will be able to see, it's a sign for everyone to see that you're entering into a separate space. You're entering into a private area, and therefore the people will know. If you're in the Reshut HaRabim, people will know that, but if you take a step, if you carry from public property into private property, you go one step, you go in, even if you don't walk 4 amot. See, in public property, you can't walk, if you walk 4 amot around 7 feet, if you carry something 7 feet in public property, there's biblical violation of the rule of carrying, correct? Going from public property to private property, it's any amount of distance, right? If this is right over here, Adam, is public property, let's say it would be. Let's say a guy goes outside the door. If we would consider the street public property on a Torah level, so then if a person, let's say if there would not be an Eruv, then if the second a person steps out of a building, out into the street, one step, he's going from private to public, or going from public property, the guy picks something up from the floor in public property, and he walks into private property, he is a violation. So but now, since this has a resemblance of, how is a person going to know that he's entering private property when this alleyway is shared by many members of this courtyard? So it has resemblance of public property, but it's really private, and it's open on one side. So what do? So you put up this string across, or this beam across, and I mean, usually people they also put the side posts. They make it look like an entranceway. You have something going across and something going like that, and that's how it's generally done. And that will serve as a sign for the people inside and the people outside. So what happens if you have a beam going from the wall? But it's not reaching the wall, the opposite wall. You want it to go from that side to that side. So let's say you have on these 3 sides, it's closed on 3 sides. Like we have in our park where we live, we have sometimes in the bushes that are next to public property, or the gate is too low. So they put up some string across, and everyone able to see, to distinguish between public and private property. If the bushes, and there's a certain amount of bushes, most probably if its majority has bushes at a certain height, that would serve as a separation, distinguish between public and private property. But if those bushes are too low, or sometimes I remember I was in England, and what was in front of the house, that the courtyard area in front of the house, there was a house, and in front of the house was like a courtyard, and the courtyard led into the street. But the street was not, but the item that led into the street was low. It wasn't a high, it wasn't, let's say, 10 tfachim. I have to see what the issue over there was. Whether it was the issue, maybe it wasn't 10 tfachim high. It was too small to be a proper fence, to be considered that it's walled, right? If you have in front of the house that leads into the public property, if you have a wall, and if it's majority closed with the wall, so that in itself will serve as a separation, right? You have the wall in front of the house. But if you have no wall, so this thing, let's say, was less than 10 tfachim, if that was the case of it, I don't remember what the case was, but there was an issue over there, because if it would have been clearly 10 tfachim high, if there would be a proper wall in front of the house that enters into the public property, so that wall that separates, it's a private area. But but like we say, the minimum height of a wall is 10 tfachim. Good morning.
I don't know.
Yeah. Have a beautiful trip. So if you as minimum size for a fence, for a wall, we said it's 10 tfachim. 10 tfachim is anywhere between 30 and 40 inches. So if it wasn't, so let's say in practice, we have to see, what do people say 37 inches? The question is, we have to see halachically what they would rely on. But let's say it didn't meet that, that height. Especially, again, it's rabbinic law, this, so maybe it could be more lenient on the size. You might not need to have a 40-inch wall, but therefore there was an issue there because it wasn't, let's say the wall didn't come out, it wasn't high enough. Similarly, in our park, there were times that the bushes didn't grow too high. It could be dependent, you have all these bushes in front of this park. It's a part that belongs to the co-op, but if the bushes and they go from the bushes into the public property, right out, where you walk outside the park. So if the bushes would be high enough, so therefore they like to grow the bushes high enough, so therefore that will serve as that separation between public property. It's like a wall. Hear what I'm saying? So these are interesting situations that you might have in front of a house, in front of a courtyard, entering into public property. What is distinguishing to make sure people should know that this is private and this is public? So if you have a wall, it could be the form of bushes. But then you would have to know how, you would most probably need to have at least the majority of that area of this going into this public property. If the majority is bushes, so then you have it's like having a wall, more wall than open space. So more wall than open space would serve as a wall, right? If there's too many openings, we learned about that, too many openings in the wall. If there's not so many bushes, there's a few bushes, that's not going to be enough. Then it's not a sufficient wall. But if a majority is bushes, or a majority is closed with these, they had in front of the house in England, they had this, concrete, whatever they had these pillars in front. But again, the question is how far does these pillars extend? If it's open too much, if there's more open space in the pillar, so then it's not serving as a wall. Am I clear? So you'll see in Brooklyn, a lot of places see in front of houses, that they have in front of their lawn, or something they want to go. They place what's adjacent to the public street. So they have this. You'll look up, you'll see they have these two boards on the sides, and they have this string going, something going across, the string going across till it looks like you go into it's like a doorway. It has an image, it's called the Surah Pesach, image of an entranceway. So here, the issue here was, you have a Korah, you have this beam going from one side, make believe, if we'll say, make believe this is the street is right outside this room. Here's our courtyard, but the courtyard is adjacent to the street, and this courtyard is shared with multiple houses that are sharing this courtyard. The courtyard belongs to the houses. But how are they going to make sure they're going to stop? They're not going to carry from the courtyard into public property. So if this whole thing would be closed like this, there's no problem. They know this is private, this is public. But let's say this whole thing was open, and there's a street over there. So if they have the string going across, that will sign as that beam going across. That will be a sign for them to know that that's public property and this is private property. Okay, but if this string that's going across, this beam that's going across, did not go from that edge to this wall to that wall, but it came within 3 tvachim of that wall. So if it's within 3 tvachim, it's as if it's attached to that wall. If it's within 9 to 12 inches, so that's the case. You have the case of Korah hayotze mikol zeh ve'inu nagah b'kol ha'achar, but it's not touching the wall that's opposite it. Or v'chein shtei korot, or you have 2 beams. You're starting with 2 beams, not one string, one beam going from one wall to the other. There's 2. One's coming from that wall, and one's coming one side from that wall, but they're trying to meet in the middle. But they don't meet in the middle because they don't extend exactly to each other. But the amount of distance between one beam and the other beam is less than 3 tvachim. So they come close enough to each other. They come within 3 tvachim, within 9 inches of 9 to 12 inches of each other. So we say, less than 3 tvachim. Eina tzarich lo bikor acheret. You don't have to bring another beam to this to be the sign. Simon, we're talking about, if you have an alleyway that opens up into public property, and there's a concern, the rabbis have a concern that you might come to walk carry something out of this, and this alleyway is enclosed on 3 sides, so it's considered a private domain, but it has 3 walls. I gave the example, make believe this alleyway had these 3 walls over here, and there's a wall going across, there's a wall over here, there's a wall over here. This is private property, wall on 3 sides, but it's open on the 4th side. This whole side is open. And because it says open, and then right outside is public property. So when you're inside here, you're in private property because I got 3 walls surrounding me. But I might come to walk out, and I'm carrying my sitter in my hand, or I'm playing ball. Maybe I should be playing ball on Shabbat. Not playing ball. I'm carrying a sitter in my hand, and I walk out. I might come to walk out because there's nothing separating me to remind me not to walk out. So we say if you put up a string, you put up a beam across before Shabbat, that will serve as your reminder, right? So what we do in practice, we put 2 side posts, the side post over there, side post over there, and we put a string that goes across. That serves as a reminder because it looks like a doorway. So that, right, so a roof is very similar. There's a string across that because that shows you that you're entering into private property. Exactly. But so now, but what about if it doesn't extend? I put up this string, but the string doesn't extend from one wall to the other. It comes close, but it doesn't touch the other wall. But if it comes within 3 tvachim, then it's considered as if it reached the wall. Similarly, we said if let's say I have one string, one beam coming out from this wall, one beam coming from that wall, and they come within 3 tvachim of each other, that's as if they're what? Connected. But if they're not within 3 tvachim, they're not called connected. That's what the Gemara is saying here on 18a. We're on 18a2. So the Gemara says, so so it says, if it's pachas mishlosha, ein esarach lavi kor acheret. I don't have to bring another beam. But shlosha, but if it's 3 tvachim, sarach lahavi kor acheret. I have to bring another beam. So we see from here that we find the concept of lavud. We say we have this rule of lavud that we consider it attached, even though it's not in a wall. It's not. It's something to do with a wall. It's not that you have a space between in a wall. This is something that is outside. That's not a wall. This is in a beam, and it's in the middle. And we say the rule of lavud extends to something in the middle of something, not just something part of a wall or adjacent to a wall. Because the Gemara suggested before, there's one opinion that says that the rule of lavud, that we consider something considered sealed, is a rule specifically in a wall or something adjacent to the wall. Like if there's spaces in a wall itself, or something that's next to a wall, a space next to, if you have a wall and you have a space on top next to the wall, then you say lavud. But if it's not connected to a wall, if it's in the middle somewhere, he said there's no rule of lavud, of that it's considered joined. And here we see the Gemara says we do extend the law of lavud even in the what? In the middle. So the Gemara says that's not a proof. What would the other rabbi say? The rabbi would say, because that's a rule in Eruvin, in a rabbinic law. The Gemara says, "V'idach shiny korot rabbanan." That's korot that's needed, a beam that's needed for rabbinic law. So for rabbinic law, the rabbi extended the law of lavud. This is what this opinion holds. In a rabbinic law, we would apply the rules of lavud, but not in Torah law. In Torah law, we will only apply it for a wall or something adjacent to a wall. But if it's not a wall, it's adjacent to a wall, we won't say the rule of what? Of lavud, that it's considered, that it closes a gap. So that's what the Gemara wants to say, that it's not a proof. But when it comes to a sukkah, which is Torah law, you need a certain type of, it's a law regarding a mitzvah mehatorah. So if you have a space in the middle of a sukkah that extends from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah, even if it's less than 3 tvachim, even if that space is less than 3 tvachim, less than 9 to 12 inches, it's going to split the sukkah in half. And let's say if you start with if you only have 3 walls, let's say you have wall 1, wall 2, wall 3, and you don't have a wall over there, let's say, you're missing that wall over there, then if you have a space running across the sukkah, even if the space is less than 3 tvachim, let's say it's a space of 2 inches, 3 inches, running across of empty space, it's not 3 tvachim, it's not 9, 12 inches. Even if it's less than that amount, it would split the sukkah in half. We know if you have an empty space running across the middle of the sukkah, here's the sukkah, I have an empty space that goes all across the sukkah, and it's wide 3 tvachim, we say it splits the sukkah in half. It makes it into 2 structures, right? We don't look at it as one structure. You have one sukkah with a space in the middle. We look at it, you have 2 sukkot. And if you started with 3 walls, you're only going to have left 2 walls on this side and 2 walls on this side. Because if you have 1 wall here, 1 wall here, and 1 wall there, but if this wall is cut in the middle because of this empty space in the middle, so now I mean I cut this wall in half. If I look at the empty space in the middle as that it cuts the sukkah in half, so it's like I have now a sukkah right on this side and a sukkah on this side. But let's say there's only 2 walls left, 1 wall and a half and 1 wall and a half. I only have 2 walls. let's say even if this side is 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, I only have 2 walls on each side. That's love. That's if you have 3 tvachim. But what about if it's a space is less than 3 tvachim going across the sukkah? And let's say that it's 1 tefach space, so less than a tefach. So until now we said that it's that space, we look at it like it's closed. But now we're saying there's an opinion that says no. In middle of a sukkah, an empty space is not considered closed. This rule of lavud is closed doesn't apply to something in the middle. And the Gemara challenged I showed you by these beams, it does apply, even though it's something in the middle. It's not something on the side, it's not something part of a wall. It's part of a beam, and we look at it as it's closed. So the Gemara says that's a special rule. It's a special dispensation that we say the rule of it there, perhaps because it's a rabbinic law. Because that's a question. The necessity of having this beam is a rabbinic law to help prevent that you shouldn't come to carry. On a Torah level, you don't need that beam. But when it comes to Torah law, like a sukkah, if you have a space in the middle, even if it's a smaller space, it's going to split the sukkah, according to this opinion. The halacha doesn't say that. Halacha, we say that if you have a space, it doesn't make a difference if it's adjacent to the wall, part of a wall, in middle of the sukkah. If it's less than 3 tvachim, we consider it sealed, and then on a Torah, and therefore you have a kosher sukkah. It doesn't split the sukkah in half. Maybe the question, maybe you shouldn't sit under that space, but it does not split the sukkah into half if you have a space less than 3 tvachim going across. So that's what the Gemara says. Now, my timer, the mandi amma ain't love be'emsa. What's the reason the Gemara wants to know that we say, where is your source? There's a law of lavu. Less than 3 tvachim connects the gap. If you have a space less than less than 9-12 inches, we say it's considered closed. So now you're telling me that it does not apply by in the middle of the schach. What's the source for such a thing? Why did you come to that conclusion? So the Gemara says, because we have a Mishnah. Ditnan. I have a Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? Aruba she bebayis. I have, let's say, this is a Mishnah in the Holos. And the Holot, you have, let's say, like a window, a hole. Right? In the old days, a window was a hole in the wall. Right? You cut a hole in the wall. That's a window. Right? You could see through. I have this hole, but it's in the ceiling. Okay? Make believe this is the ceiling. This is the penthouse. Make believe this is the penthouse, and I got a little hole in the ceiling. And it's ba poter tefach. This hole in the ceiling is the size of 1 tefach by 1 tefach, 3 to 4 inches by 3 to 4 inches. Okay, I got this space in the ceiling, and there's tumah b'bayit. I have, but in, let's say, this room, there's a dead body in the room, and this dead body is under the ceiling. It's under the roof of the ceiling. It's not under the empty skylight, that empty space of a tefach. So now, the general rule is, if there's a dead corpse in a room, whatever's under that roof, if there's a corpse in the room, so there's a ceiling that covers the corpse and it's covering the rest of the room. So anything that's in the room becomes contaminated, right? That's what the pasuk says. Adam kiyamut ba'ol. Person passed away in a tent. Anything that's in the tent, anything that's in that tent, because it's under the same, it's covering the dead body and it's covering everything else in the tent. So it's under one ceiling. So we say that everything in the house is what? Is kameh. So here, but what about if we have something underneath the skylight? So the thing that's underneath the skylight, that empty space, is not under the cover. It's not under the same cover that's covering the dead body. There's no cover that's on top of this. If, let's say, you have needles she's a seamstress that lives in this house, and she deals with needles and thread, and the needles and the thread are underneath this opening, is directly underneath the skylight. She always wanted that she liked the heat. The heat of the sun was very good for the needles. That's that, making up a story about the needles. But they left the item. They wanted the light, or they put certain items underneath the skylight, so those items will not become contaminated, even though it's in the same room with the dead body, but it's not under the same roof, right? Like we spoke about once. Remember, if a kohanim have to be careful. There's certain trees that hovers, that the same tree some of the tree goes over the cemetery, and some of the branches go over into the street. So the Kohen has an issue walking under that tree, because that tree is serving as a tent for the dead body. At the same time, it's covering over the street. So here we say tumah b'bayit, if there's contamination in the house, kulu tameh, all the utensils that's in the house will become contaminated. But mashikineged haruba, but what's facing the skylight, the open space, is tahor. It's considered pure. Those needles didn't become contaminated. Now, how big was the space that the needles were under? It was under an empty space of a tefach. It was less than 3 tefachim. If we say there's a rule of lavud that it closes in the middle, so then we should look at that skylight as if the skylight is what? Is closed, because it's less than 3 tefachim, that hole in the middle. And yet we say that mashikineged haruba is tahar. What's facing the skylight is considered what? Pure. It does not become contaminated. So we don't look at it like it's closed. Now, and similarly, the Mishnah states, if let's say the space is not even a tefach, the empty space, let's say, is a half a tefach. It's let's say 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, let's say. Tumah b'bayit. And also the similar story. There's a dead body in the corner of this house. So we say, kineged haruba, what's facing the skylight is what? It's tahar. Would be considered tahar. We don't look at it like it's closed. Now, tumah kineged haruba. Let's say there's the dead body. Let's say there's a part of there's a certain, let's say, certain size of the body, a certain size of a bone, would contaminate the house, right? Certain size of a bone, or let's say a certain amount of, piece of flesh of the dead body. So this tumah kineged haruba, if there's a contamination facing this, I think maybe an etzem kesora, maybe a bone the size of a barley. You have to see what the halach, what the size is. Whatever the size is that's considered sufficient to contaminate. The tumah kineged haruba, if you have that size facing the skylight, kol habayit tahor. Even though the hole is what? Very insignificant. It's less than 3 tefachim. The whole house, kol habayit tahor. The whole house is considered tahor, because there's no cover, there's no ohel, there's no tent over the dead part of the body, because it's the dead part of the body is under the skylight. But it's true it's under the skylight, but if we consider it's closed, so then it's under a cover, it's under the ceiling, it's under the tent. So the whole house should be contaminated. So we see that we don't apply the rule of lavud by something in the middle. So the Gemara says, the Idach, how does the other rabbi, what is he going to say to this? Shiny hilchot tumah. The laws of tumah are different. Tahachi gemirilo. What is he saying? He's saying that there's the halacha called lavud. Lavud joins things together. And really, lavud should join things together in the middle, like by a sukkah. we say that it joins the things together in the middle of the schach. If you have an empty space running across a sukkah, the middle of a sukkah, if this will be a sukkah, and we got an empty space running across the middle, going from one end to the other, if it's less than 3 tvachim, it should seal it. It's considered, it's not considered two different structures. But when it comes to the laws of tum'ah, the halacha, the Moshe Misinai for tum'ah is that it does not, in such a case, when you have skylight in the middle of the room, we don't say it's as if it's sealed, and therefore, if there's a dead part of the body underneath the skylight, it's as if it's under a ceiling, because it's the hole in the ceiling is less than 3 tvachim. That's not, no, the halacha Moshe Misinai says that by tumah, we don't say that lavud. We're not going to say lavud in such a that it's considered closed. Rashi says the halacha Moshe Misinai from tumah is we don't say lavud in the middle. We don't say that we're going to look at this hole in the ceiling as if it's closed. We don't say that by tumah in the middle. But by sukkah, we will say that it's closed. So by tumah, therefore, we'll have this leniency that if there's a dead body in the room, and there's needles underneath the open area in the ceiling, we're not going to look at it as if the ceiling is closed and the needles that are directly under the opening would be contaminated because it's under a roof. We don't say that. We don't apply the rule of lavud that if less than 3 tvachim is considered closed and that will contaminate the needles. And similarly, if the dead body, that part of the body that's underneath the open air space, we're going to say lavud, it's closed, and therefore the whole room, everything is contaminated. If the only part is under the empty space on top, we're going to look at it that it's not considered closed. That's the halacha. Good morning. That's the halacha la Moshe Misinai. So we'll continue tomorrow. With the Gemara is gonna, we'll see where the Gemara is gonna take us in some beautiful places. We're gonna get into fish tomorrow, everybody. Kosher and not kosher fish.